Okay, so it's 8:30, and I'll call this meeting to order. Carrie, will you please take roll?
Chair Brooks.
Here.
Vice Chair Ariscotta.
Here.
Regent Boylan. Regent Boylan. Regent Brager.
Here.
Regent Brown.
Here.
Regent Carvalho. Regent Cruz Crawford.
Here.
Thank you, Regent Carvalho. Regent Cruz Crawford. Regent Del Carlo.
Here.
Regent Downs.
Here.
Regent Goodman.
Here.
Regent Regent McMichael.
Here.
Regent Perkins. Regent Tarkanian. You have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Regent Brager, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Here.
To the flag, States of America, to the republic for which it stands.
All right, thank you, Regent Brager. I'd like to recognize Deputy Attorney General Chrissy Harris, who's with us today to support us with open meeting law. Thank you very much for being here, Ms. Harris. We appreciate it. We'll now move to agenda item number 1, which will be public comment. Is there any public comment in Elko?
There is no public comment in Elko.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in Reno?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Jim New, N-E-W. I'm a community college professor and the incoming president of the Nevada Faculty Alliance. I'm also a resident in District 10 and a constituent of Regent Ariscotta. After 25 years at TMCC, I am heartened to finally see a legislative session where there is still some measure of optimism as we enter the last few weeks. I am especially grateful for bills like AB 491, which will help the community colleges as they recover from the enrollment impacts of the pandemic. It's also the first time in my history at the college where my fellow faculty members are optimistic that salary adjustments would have a material impact for them. The governor's proposal of 10% and 4% cost of living adjustments is a significant step forward, but keep in mind, it still leaves Nevada faculty lagging behind their peers in other states. The additional 2% COLA and longevity pay proposed in the legislature would certainly help us improve national competitiveness to retain and recruit the faculty who are so critical to fulfilling NSHE's mission and goals. We also understand the difficulty of funding the COLA and support the system administration and board's work with the legislature and the governor to mitigate the impacts on campus operations and growth. It is absolutely critical that NSHE employees receive the same cost of living adjustments as all the other state employees. I also encourage you to support AB 224, the collective bargaining bill for NSHE professionals. Thank you for your work on these critical issues. The long-term recruitment and retention of talented faculty and staff in Nevada depends on it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amanda Vasco. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Associated Students of the University of Nevada. Regarding the 2023-2025 biennial budget, the pandemic budget restorations, increases in graduate student stipends are a blessing for higher education. Additionally, the cost of living adjustments proposed are important to ensure that faculty pay is catching up with inflation, so that us students can continue to receive a quality education at an NSHE institution. However, if these COLAs were not fully funded, it would negatively impact our experience at NSHE. Cutting faculty could mean longer wait times for academic counselors and less administrative support for students in general. Additionally, the prospect of raising our student fees is less than ideal. In fiscal year 24, the average student taking 15 credits at UNR would see an $81.60 increase in their undergraduate student fees for the semester. Following in fiscal year 25, students taking 15 credits at UNR would have to pay an additional $182.10. For students, $182.10 is around 16 hours of work, a month's worth of groceries, or part of their monthly loan repayment plan. Utilizing student fees as a funding mechanism is a last resort option, and with a huge surplus this biennium, I'm unsure that we have to resort to this option at this time. Overall, budget restorations, grad student stipend increases, and more funding to NSHE in this biennium look promising for student development. However, I encourage seeking alternative funding to cover the cost of living adjustment in total so we don't have to raise student fees. Thank you.
That's all for me now.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in Las Vegas?
Hello, my name is Chantal, Shantal Marshall, Marshall. I am an associate professor at Nevada State College and also a proud resident of District 12, where my regent is Amy Carvalho. And I'm here to reiterate some of the things that have already been said. I was department chair when the world closed down, but we still had to deliver a meaningful, impactful learning environment to our students. And as chair, I saw firsthand the hard work that our faculty put in to make it happen, even though we were also living through a pandemic and having some of the worst times in our lives happen at the same time. And to be quite honest, the recognition for that hard work was really hardly noticed, given that faculty and staff held higher education in Nevada together for that time. So I am beyond excited about the discussions we're having about cost of living adjustments. Not only will it help retain that faculty that worked so hard to get us through that time, it'll also help with recruitment. As chair, I've seen how hard it is to recruit really top talent to the state, and magically income has a really big impact on that. And so I'd really love to urge you to work with the legislature to get those COLAs funded outside of our budgets. It is tough to imagine that we would gain, but also lose at the same time. So I really want to let you know that we are at a moment where higher education is highly valued. We're starting to get there in Nevada, and this is a step towards that. I can't tell you how amazing our students are. You just saw one of our recent graduates, she's graduating right now, speak, and she is the future, and all of our students are the future of the state. So when we fund COLAs, we fund a system that helps Nevada move forward and become a really shining star in the space of higher education. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe there's any additional public comment here in Las Vegas, so we'll move right into agenda number 2, which is the budget briefing by our acting chancellor. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, Dale Urquiaga, acting chancellor of the Nevada System of Higher Education. So I'm going to build on what the public comment said. This is a unique moment in the system's history, I think. I was reflecting this morning with CFO Klinger. I have been on all sides of this conversation. As you know, I am a product of the Nevada System of Higher Education. The first time I testified at the legislature, it was as a student at UNR. I have served in 2 gubernatorial administrations, during one of which significant cuts were made to this system's budget, as well as all other budgets. I have served as state superintendent and have been on the receiving side of the largest tax increase in history, and have been able to, in that role, work with prior Chancellor Clage. And now I stand before you today in this role at a time when there's more money in history than ever in our state's history collected as tax revenues, and these great gains as recovery from the pandemic are being marked. So my first report to you on the budget is, as you know, the money committees have closed the operating and capital improvement budgets, and they closed them almost exactly at GovRec. And that is, of course, good for the system. The governor's budget restored those funds from the pandemic largely, and made some other significant investments, including graduate students and others that you've heard. So those were great days of watching those committees move through that process. It was a great relief to get through that process. We still have some one-shots, bills that have all been introduced now, but they need to move through the system. Everything hasn't been perfect. We've lost a little workforce training money along the way. The way in which legislative staff recommended the funding formula be set aside for this biennium affects our institutions differently than we had budgeted, but the net gain is still to the positive. And so we are in this very positive place. And as you have heard, the governor and legislature have embraced the idea of very significant cost of living adjustments, or what we will call COLAs, throughout the day. That is both a good thing and a challenging thing, and you understand why, and we'll talk about that more. But I want to begin by saying, first, thank you to the governor for GovRec, thank you to the money committees for the work that they've done, and then thank you to the governor and his office for processing an amendment to fund our COLAs at 80% instead of 65%. And I think you all understand how that works. CFO Klinger will explain it as well. As I say, that difference between 65 and 80% is where we have a problem. So nothing that I'm about to say or that you will hear this morning is meant to diminish the role of our staff and faculty or in any way imply that we don't support the COLAs. We do, I know you do. It's important that we have them. We are also trying to find out the best ways to fund it all. And so with that in mind, I'm going to give you sort of a metaphor, I guess. The English teachers can tell me if it's a metaphor or a simile, I never know. But as I do that, I want just to remind you, I'm not asking for decisions today. I am sharing the weight of the work that the staff and the presidents are doing at the legislature. I need your thinking. We need your feedback. We need your support. And as the person who will be with you through the development of your next budgets, I need you to be thinking about what will happen after session. You may have to make some decisions then. You don't have to make any today. But as I have tried to in my short tenure here sort of signal to you what's coming, that's the intent of today. We are signaling there's some big decisions ahead for you and for our presidents, but I'm not asking for you to make decisions. I'm asking for you to sort of be our thought partner as we go through this. So now for my little story. I've been trying to think about the best way to talk about this. Andrew will handle the mathiness, as I say, and I will handle the wordiness. And so for me, I am thinking about this particular problem as pie. Everyone likes pie, right? So I'd like you to think about a pumpkin pie, because I can't eat pumpkin pie if it doesn't have whipped cream on top of it. So you all have a pumpkin pie in mind, and you all know there's whipped cream for that pie, without which you won't eat the pie. 2/3 of that pie are state funded. 1/3 of that pie is funded with student fees and tuition. With me? COLAs, in this sense, because they are so large, are whipped cream. At 65%, or 2/3, again, I'm not the math guy, we would be receiving enough whipped cream to make the 2/3 pie whole. The 1/3 pie doesn't have any whipped cream in that scenario. And so you either make more whipped cream, you take some whipped cream off of this side of the pie and put it on this side of the pie, which means that side of the pie gets less, or you cut away some of the pie on the 2/3 side so that it'll give you enough and everybody have the same level. With me? What that means is, to get more whipped cream, we raise student fees. Or we sort of level out the amount of whipped cream we have, which means our employees don't all get a 10% raise. They might get a 6.5% raise because we have to share it over here on this side of the pie. Or there's a little less pie, which means we hold positions vacant or we lay people off. That's how I think about this. Remember, there's a whole other pie. That pie is the self-supporting pie, and all the whipped cream that will go on that pie, we will provide. We are committed to that. Whatever this pie gets from the legislature, this pie will get from those self-supporting fees. That's a big number, so now we'll give you the numbers. Just the whipped cream for the self-supporting pie is about $83 million over the biennium that our presidents will need to find in those self-supporting revenues or self-supporting reserves. To cover all of this pie over here, we need, that's the gap. What's 26 and 35? The total, 80% number. Okay. I think it's about $60 million for all the whipped cream on this pie. If we only get 65%, it's a gap of $26 million. But either way, even if we get the whole pie covered at 80%, we still have to make some adjustments. We sort of roll with that as we go. That's a normal gap between 80 and 100%, that 60 million plus to what the total cost is. So that's the challenge before you today. Last week, I asked the presidents to prepare sort of contingency plans. How do we close the gap? The governor has given an amendment to the legislature to close the gap. It's $26 million. We support that amendment. If that amendment passes, everybody gets pie. We go home, we're good when the pay bill passes. Without that amendment is what you're going to hear today. I've asked the presidents to prepare for you some contingency plans. I've asked CFO Klinger to prepare contingency plans of what happens at the system level, because these are now, no decisions, things to think about. We can think about layoffs. We can think about student fees. We can think about furloughs. We can think about hiring freezes. Those are the options to get us through this scenario. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to stop being wordiness guy, and I'm going to have CFO Klinger sort of present to you the actual numbers behind my pie scenario, and he'll give you sort of the system level. And then, Mr. Chair, what I would ask that you do is call upon the presidents, because they have each given this thought, and they have some ideas and plans to share with you for us all to think about. So thank you for your indulgence.
Morning, Chair Brooks, Regents. For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger. Apparently, I'm good at math unless put on the spot by the Chancellor, and then my brain freezes up. So just to build on what the Chancellor was talking about in reference to the COLAs, and there's a bunch of tables starting on page 4 in your supplemental material, and I don't want to go through all of those tables with you unless you have specific questions about them, but just wanted to highlight a few things. And I guess first I want to just sort of start with a little bit of history on how COLAs have been funded in the past. And so what the state does, and they do this for all state agencies, including the system of higher education, is they calculate what they think the cost of the COLA is. They set that money aside, and they actually put that money in an account at the state level, and we actually have to come apply for that money, and so does every other state agency. And up until 2019, they funded NSHE at 80%, just like they did other state agencies. And the theory there is that when you have that many agencies and that much personnel out there, that they know that they're not going to spend 100% of the COLA because there's turnovers, there's vacancies, and so they set aside 80% knowing that that's going to be enough with just the normal turnover that happens. Well, what happened in 2019 as they calculated our share of the COLA, there was an error made in that calculation. And so suddenly it was 80% of 80%. Literally, somebody made an error in a spreadsheet and applied 80% to a spreadsheet that already had 80% applied to it. And so that became what was approved in the 2019 legislative session, and that has now carried forward to sort of where we are today. And when you talk to the fiscal analyst and when you talk to legislators about it, the theory that they use to explain this is that for other state agencies, so if you have an agency like Medicaid that has partial state funding and partial federal funding, they only give Medicaid the portion of funding based on their proportionate share of state funding because they can go get additional Medicaid dollars to pay the other half. And so when they look at the NSHE budgets, they apply the same logic. As the Chancellor stated, we're roughly 2/3 funded from the state and 1/3 from student fees. And so when they look at it, they say, well, you're 2/3 state funded, so we're only going to give you 2/3 of the cost of the COLA. Well, that works if the assumption is that on the other 1/3, we just have that money sitting there unencumbered, unbudgeted. And in this case, we don't, because when we build those budgets and we build it with the 2/3 and the 1/3, that 1/3 is paying for positions, it's paying for operating costs, so that money is already obligated. And so as I think the Chancellor has laid out very well, that leaves us with choices of either we have to make cuts through operating cuts, positions, or we have to raise student fees. So as we looked at this, we looked at sort of several system-wide options for the board to consider. And it's one of the options, and it's not in your material specifically, and we did this during the pandemic, was what if we implemented furloughs? And so if we implemented 6 furloughs a year, so 1 furlough every other month, that's approximately, across the system, that's approximately $13 million a year. And as the chancellor stated, there's about $26.2 million gap between the 65 and the 80% funding. So if you did 6 furloughs a year, that would essentially cover that gap. The other option that we looked at is, okay, our other option is to raise student fees. What would it take if we raised student fees and we did it evenly across all of the institutions? And on page 10 and 11 in your supplemental material are 2 schedules that essentially show what that looked like. And so if we raise the basic registration fee in fiscal '24, we would have to raise it 4.78%, which would generate $10.6 million, which is enough to cover the first year. And in the second year, we would have to raise tuition 6.87%, and that would cover about 15.6, and that's the balance in the second year. So if we made those adjustments to student fees, then that would essentially cover the gap. And page 11 sort of lays out what those fees are, and we raise them equally across the board, because traditionally what we do with registration fees is, as you know, we have predictable pricing, and so we have pricing published all the way out currently through 2027, and we make adjustments to those registration fees typically using the Higher Education Price Index. And the intent of that is so that when a student registers, they can predict what their registration fees are going to be going out for 4 years. So those are a couple of the options that we looked at. We asked each of the presidents to put together, in addition to the system-wide solutions that we've proposed, we asked each of the presidents to put together what would it take to balance the state operating budget on your campus if you didn't receive the funding at 80%. And we also asked them to tell us, well, what would it take even if it's funded at 80%? Because even at 80%, there's still a $36.5 million gap that exists. And when I spoke to the governor's office and asked them to make this amendment, one of the things they said to me, they said, oh, so you're asking for an adjustment to 80%. And I said, well, really what I'd like to ask for is an adjustment to 100%. But since no agency is funded at 100%, yes, I'm asking for 80%. But even at 80%, there still is a $36.5 million gap across the board. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions or turn it back over to the Chancellor or the presidents.
Thank you. We appreciate the presentation. Let me just check in and see if there's any regents that have questions based on what we've done so far. Are there any questions? Okay. Regent Good.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to clarify. Basically, in 2019, there was an error made, and the legislature decided to just move forward with that error. And we are the only agency now that is getting 65% rather than the 80% because of that error that was made. And thanks to our governor, he's trying to fix that for us. So I guess I would say that it's important for all the individuals out there who are looking at the Regents to fix this. This is really something that's happening with our legislature. So with all due respect, it sounds like we need to fix the mistake that was made in 2019. So I just want to make sure that it's a little frustrating that we're even having to talk about implementing student fees. It's a little bit frustrating that we're even having to talk about furloughs because it's not okay. And I just want to put this out there that this is not us. This is the legislature basically running with the mistake, unfortunately, that was made. And I would ask them kindly to take a look at this again.
Regent Carvalho? Regent Carvalho, do you have a question? We'll come back to Regent Carvalho.
Yes,
Okay, there we go.
I'm sorry about this. I'm traveling right now, so I'm on the phone. I do have a question for CFO Klinger. In the backup materials on the page that does show the proposed increases to the registration fees, the beginning amounts of those don't match what we have for our predictable pricing fees in the procedures and guidelines manual. And I was hoping CFO Klinger could explain the difference between what's in the backup materials for this agenda and what we see in our PGM.
Chair Brooks, Regent Carvalho, for the record, CFO Klinger. Are you talking about the amounts that are on page 11? Because the amounts that are on page 11 should match if you're looking at, and I'll have to pull up the procedures and guidelines manual to look at the section, but they should match the amounts that are in fiscal year 24 and 25. Now that table that's in the procedures and guidelines manual goes all the way out to fiscal year 27, but when you look at the current fee column, those numbers should match the columns that are in FY24 and 25. And when I get a second, I'll look and make sure, but they should match.
I'm trying to pull it up as well. In the procedures and guidelines manual for, I don't know what page that would be on, but it shows for academic year 22-23 for registration and fees for undergraduate for universities, as an example. It shows registration fee of $256 a credit, and then I think in our materials shows $176.65. So perhaps I'm looking at the wrong table in the procedures and guidelines manual, and if that's the case, then I stand corrected.
Yeah, Regent Carvalho, I'll look at it real quick, but it should match what's in Chapter 7 of the Procedures and Guidelines Manual, but I'll take a quick look.
Okay. We can talk about that offline. I'm sorry to take up time on that, but I did notice it when I was frantically going through this last night, and I saw a difference there. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other? I'm sorry, go ahead.
It just clicked. Chair Brooks, Regent Carvalho, I know what it is. The reason it doesn't match, it just all of a sudden clicked in, sorry, the caffeine must have just kicked in, is I'm only using, and you'll see this in the back of the Procedures and Guidelines manual where we do the fee distribution. So it's only the portion of the student fee that goes to the state operating budget. That's what it is.
Okay, so then it's for students. It isn't exactly a 4.87% increase in their total credit fee. Then is that correct? It's actually to students. It's actually less than that we're discussing.
Yeah, Regent Carvalho, you are correct. It's 4.87% of the portion of the fee that goes to the state operating budget. So the percentage of the overall fee would be something less than that. So you are correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Regent Del Carlo.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I think the public comment from, it was Chantel, I think Marshall from Nevada State College. She really summed this up. She said, we're going to gain but lose at the same time. And with the state so flush in cash, I just find this whole conversation so unsettling. And I think you were right, Regent Goodman, that this was all created at the legislature. We've never been fixed since a mistake was made. But the other thing, we haven't heard from any of our students about any fee increases. And I know in 2016, when I was running for office, one of my questions I had of the then chancellor was, how much is on average our student debt? And he told me at the time, the average student debt was $22,000 a year. So CFO Klinger, is that still the case, or is it more, is it less? I mean, the whole idea of even raising student fees is abhorrent to me, but it's even worse to think we're gonna furlough people, that we would cut programs. And we suffered so much during the pandemic, and we're just trying to get our mojo back. And we owe it to the students and the citizens of Nevada, because we rank so low in so many areas for students going on to higher ed and graduation rate. So CFO Klinger, do you know what our average student graduates for debt?
Chair Brooks, Regent Del Carlo, for the record, I don't know what our average student graduates with debt, but I do know when you look at comparisons to the student fees that our students pay to other states, that overall there are only 2 states that have lower fees than we do here at the Nevada System of Higher Education, and that's California and Florida. But I don't know the level of debt, but I can find out.
Okay, thank you.
Give me 1 second. Regent Breger.
Thank you very much. I think being a united front is going to be extremely important. And Regent Goodman and everyone, I don't want to name everyone, we're on point. And I do believe that our legislature goes there trying to do the best that they can, but I believe the best that they can is not enough this time. And I fully believe that this is something that, how long do we talk about that education is important in the state of Nevada? I grew up here. I'm not going to say when, but we keep hearing the same song and dance, and it's time to get out of that circle and to really prove that education is important. So I would stress again, what we're hearing is that we do need to be funded properly. We need to get off the bottom, and we need to show that we are a state that values education. So I really hope that they will look at this, and due to a past mistake, let's not keep living with that. Let's make sure that we can show our students, our parents, those that want to be educated in the future, that we care about them, because it's not being shown, and it hasn't been shown, quite honestly, for about 60 years.
Acting Chancellor, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Dale Urquiaga. So I just want to talk about sources of money for a little bit. And first of all, thank you all for listening to us and supporting what we are processing. That is very helpful for the CFO and myself, and I know it is for the presidents as well. So I just want to talk a little bit about all the money, because we hear that a lot. And I say this not to make excuses for the money committees in the legislature, but so that we all understand. There are 2 kinds of money. There's a great deal of one-shot money this time. We have a surplus from the prior year. We will have a surplus in this year. One cannot use surplus money for this. This is not a bridge issue. This is not a temporary issue. If the legislature were to have a separate appropriation of one-shot dollars to close the gap between 65 and 80%, for example, that money would be redacted from the budget when you go back, because you take legislative approps and then you back out all the one-shots and you start with that as space. So what the governor has proposed in his amendment is to put that $26 million onto the base. That means it is competing with all other operating expenses, including our own, let us remember that, during this biennium. And so as we have met with members of the legislature, they have said, well, where would we get that money? And so just know that that is what they grapple with. They cannot just go to the till of those one-shot monies for this purpose. That would actually harm us more in the long run. And so we want to work with them and the governor to be sure that this funding is at the 80% level and that it is therefore in base so that it rolls forward into future biennia. Otherwise, if it's funded at 65%, and we don't get any one-shots, we'll take the cuts this time and they will compound as we continue to increase over time. So I just wanted to clarify there are different kinds of money, and what seems easy because we have all this money this session isn't easy. And so again, I appreciate your feedback and your support. And with that, Mr. Chair, if you would, let's hear from our presidents about how this would impact their institutions.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Acting Chancellor. So I think one of the broader discussion areas or considerations that we have to have regarding this is faculty retention. And that's a conversation that I have said time and time again, we don't speak upon enough when we're taking a look at the budget and what this actually means. And so when we take a look at what are the existing challenges that we have with higher education, faculty retention is one of them. And this actually addresses faculty retention either in a very positive manner or in a manner that is eventually going to be an unintended consequence and trickle-down effect that will erode itself in our institutions by way of either furlough or raising student fees. And I think as those who are paying attention to the meeting can gather, I don't think that this board has an appetite. In fact, I'm confident in saying the board does not have an appetite to raise student fees, and that we are really hoping that our legislators, those who are empowered to be able to make these decisions, particularly through a governor who has already been generous enough to make an amendment for this so that we can start filling these gaps, I think is something that has to be noted in terms of what this really looks like. And so the question that I have, because this has been outlaid in really a fantastic manner by you, by our CFO, it's very clear where we are. I mean, you used rather than a color chart, you used pie and whipped cream to describe the conditions that we're in financially. My question is, where's the lack of I don't want to use the word understanding, but essentially what I'm wondering is, what are the real challenges with the legislative bodies that they're not picking up on the things that have been outlaid right now so that they can clearly and decisively make very positive decisions that would, again, positively impact higher education in the state of Nevada? Where are those challenges at?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Dale Urquiaga. At my advanced age and years of experience, I will say it is dangerous to try to get in the head of an elected official. With due respect to all of you. But here's what I hear and what I draw in the building as I have attempted to represent you there these last, whatever it is, 100 days. There is a perception that NSHE has lots of money. There is a perception that NSHE pays people like me well. And there is a perception that our monies are perhaps more fungible, I think is the mathy word, than they are. So we do have money in self-supporting accounts and reserves. Those monies, however, are restricted. We have nearly $1 billion in grants and that side of the ledger here. But it's committed monies, but it's money, right? And so it seems like, well, you people have a lot of money. Which is why I try to talk about things that I understand like pie. That pie isn't the same pie. And so but that perception of NSHE has lots of money, we're a $2 billion enterprise, we do have a lot of money. But in these buckets, in these scenarios, the money can't be moved around as easily as folks think it is. And yes, we have highly compensated folks in the system, but we have 15,000 employees, the vast majority of whom make what state employees make. And so they are analogous to state employees, and I think should be treated the same as state employees. But, you know, there's a perception, what a chancellor makes, what a president makes, what an athletic coach makes. Well, we also have professionals who make $50,000 a year in our system. So I think part of that is the perception, part of that is the reality of our budgets, and part of it is, to be blunt, our own history. I started my story by saying I have been around a very long time. I've been on all sides of this system, including now inside. We haven't always done ourselves favors. And so I think there is a tendency, again, I don't mean to get in anyone's head and speak for them, but there is a tendency to say, you guys solve this. You always want to solve your own problems, solve this problem. And this is a problem, I think, and would represent to you, not of NSHE's making. And so we are asking that the state, of which we are a part, help us solve this problem.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that answer. Regent Breger, you have a question or comment?
Just once more, technically, there are no more notches on the belt. And that's what we need to know. And we can't go back to our students. It's hard enough for students to be educated now, and to put that burden on them is just not the right thing to do. And to harm pay increases and those that have worked hard throughout the system, it does have to stop. So I think in having gone through all the president's proposals, which, I mean, I've read them all, I think that highlighting that so that the public understands, I mean, I believe we as a board understand the cuts and what happens and the lack of not that professors teach any less or teachers teach, but who wants to come here? You know, every time we turn around, yes, we have a lower economic system and our taxes are lower, but everything else has gone up. And so we have to look at that in an honest manner. But what I'm seeing here is just frightening. So I hope that they're going to highlight this so that those that do pay attention to higher education and our legislative base will understand what's really going on within each campus.
Thank you. So I think I'm sorry, is someone?
Yeah, it's me, Boylan.
Regent Boylan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we're not going to make any final things here today, and this is all information. But if we don't start eating less pie and tightening our belts, we will be in more problems. The first thing we need to do is to have a total freeze on employment. And I think we will do great. We'll do well. That could be the first step, besides other things that have been mentioned. I don't share anything about a freeze on employment. So that's just my idea, my consideration, instead of burdening our students anymore. And like Susan Breger said, it's difficult for the students now to get through life and graduate. So I'm firmly against any student fee increases. I think there's a lot we can do with the system as it is right now. That's all I had, so thank you so much.
I think it would be great if we could hear from the presidents. I think we've got a great overview of exactly where the numbers are and some of the considerations that could happen based on which way the funding goes for COLA. President Zaragoza, since you are here with us, I'd like to offer you to go first and let us know how this would affect CSN.
Chairman Brooks, Regents, Acting Chancellor, colleagues, and guests, for the record, I'm Federico Zaragoza, President of the Colleges of Nevada, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to provide a high-level overview of the budget impact that the proposed COLA budget will have on CSN. But first, I want to acknowledge that COLA increases will have an immediate positive impact on overall institutional morale, as well as our faculty, staff, and recruitment and retention efforts. However, it's also important to understand that there are many budget pressures confronting CSN and our sister institutions during this legislative session. So before I begin to address the budget pressures, I need to inform the board that CSN has a budget adjustment task force that provides all our CSN stakeholders with input and a seat on the table as it relates to budget reduction matters. And at this time, the budget adjustment task force has not addressed increase in student fees as one of our proposals. However, it is likely that CSN may follow our sister institutions in requesting increase in student fees if recommended by the task force. I also need to emphasize that at CSN, almost 80% of our budget is in salary line items. As a result, our options to offset budget gaps are extremely limited, and we rely heavily on freezing positions. Even after applying operational budget cuts of 20 to 30% in areas such as travel, subscription hosting, and consulting expenses, our options are very limited in terms of the bottom line impact. With that stated, I'd like to address 4 budget pressures addressing CSN. Budget pressure number 1, CSN was significantly and adversely impacted by the COVID-related declining enrollment trends nationally. CSN has not been immune to the enrollment challenges, and serious threats confront higher education, and particularly community colleges, even today. COVID has clearly had an adverse impact on enrollment. CSN experienced a cumulative enrollment decrease of 16.7% during the critical count year. This translates to approximately $16.6 million lost in weighted contact hour and related student revenues annually. The state restoration provides approximately $6 million per year. So this leaves the gap about $15 million per year based on the current budget scenario. When you factor in capacity funding, this increases to approximately $20 million per year. CSN will allocate approximately $14 million or $28 million for the biennium from our set-asides of $36 million from the HERV budget. So we have that one opportunity that's going to help us through this transition, but it's a one-time funding, and I want to emphasize that. Budget pressure number 2, CSN has almost $5 million per year in capacity funding, and you heard the acting chancellor speak to the workforce impact that the legislative decisions have had. For us, it's a $5 million per year annual impact. And it's going to impact our ability to continue to provide supplemental services and programs in nursing, advanced manufacturing, information technology, apprenticeships, logistics and distribution. In other words, the high demand occupations in Southern Nevada. The plan is to reduce operating expenses by approximately 20 or 30%, and that'll generate $3 million. And we also plan to freeze 29 positions in order to generate an additional $2.6 million. Budget pressure number 3, this is the impact of COLA at the 80% with a 20% funding gap. So for FY24 and for FY26, funded at 80%, CSN will need to self-fund about $2 million in FY24 and $2.9 million in FY25 respectively. This additional expense will require CSN to freeze 23 more positions in FY24 and up to 26 positions in FY25. So this will bring our total frozen positions to 52 positions in FY24 and 55 positions respectively in FY25. Budget pressure number 4, which would be impact of COLA at 68.1%, which is our prorated portion of the 65% gap. For FY24 and FY25, with COLA funded at 68.1% for CSN, CSN will need to self-fund about $3.2 million and $4.6 million respectively in FY24 and 25. The difference between the 68.1 and 80% equate to $1.2 million in FY24 and $1.7 million in FY25. These additional expenses will require CSN to freeze another 12 additional positions in FY24 and 19 more in FY25. This would bring our total positions to be frozen to 64 in FY24 and 74 positions in FY25. For the record, 74 positions represents about 6% of our total workforce. Regents, CSN is already working through our budget alignment task force on specific solutions to address the enrollment budget gap, the 80% COLA funding gap, and finally the 68% funding gap if needed. But it is clear that reductions in staffing of this magnitude will have significant impact on our ability to sustain the very positive momentum that we have experienced as pertains to graduation, retention, and degree granting performance areas. We also anticipate that some of the most likely areas to be impacted are those areas that show the great promise in terms of student success, such as the ability to meet our 350-to-1 advisor-to-student ratio, our ability to support our early college and dual enrollment programs, maintaining campus-based schedules and common student experiences at all 3 of our campuses, our ability to address critical labor market and workforce needs, and lastly, the ability to create pathways and community partnerships into underserved areas of the city. Mr. Chairman, that constitutes my report.
Thank you very much. Are there any regents who have questions specifically regarding CSN and the effect that shortfall of funding would have on the campus? Okay, is President Whitfield with us? Perfect. President Whitfield, if you can hear me, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and Board. For the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. President Zaragoza gave an incredible overview of some of the challenges that are there. Let me see if I can put an exclamation point on some of them from our perspective of what we would run into. Our most clear way in which we would try to make up for the deficit that even the 80% would leave for us is that we would have to hold positions vacant that are essential to the operations of the university. As Zaragoza highlighted, we have been working very hard to make sure that we keep our retention up, that we actually increase our recruitment of students into the university. We graduated over 3,500 students just this last weekend. And our ability to be able to do that is essentially based on our ability to be able to have the people in places to be able to work with students. And so the lack of funding actually impacts that. It impacts our ability to offer the courses that students need for successful matriculation. It impacts our support of students by financial aid counselors, advisors, other support services, and even would and will impact our ability to offer sections and courses that students need to be able to complete their degrees. It also impacts our actual financial aid budget. Like for many students, we have lots of students that have a significant amount of need. We have really put a significant amount of effort to trying to be able to make sure that we offer as much financial aid as possible to as many students as possible, and that those sources would be drained by trying to fill in the hole that this is even the 80% actually provides, but definitely the 64%. And then lastly, I'd say that this will probably, and I would say likely, have to suspend performance pay to our faculty. Performance pay is one of the wonderful kind of mechanisms that we use to be able to retain the great faculty that we have. So there are a number of different implications for trying to make up these budget deficits without some other sort of ask or action. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for President Whitfield? President Pollard?
Good morning, Regent Brooks and members of the Board of Regents. Greetings to you from Reno, where I am today, and looking forward to a good trip, hopefully talking to our legislators and others about the needs of Nevada State. I've been struck by this conversation for a lot of reasons, and in particular, I remembered Regent Amy Carvalho's comment early on when she talked about predictable pricing. And I've always been struck by that, as you know, someone who's still learning quite a bit about the system here in Nevada. And I thought we have predictive pricing, but we don't have predictive revenues. We don't have predictive support of students, and we don't have predicted growth as a part of something that we think deeply about. And as a result of that, I'm deeply concerned about where we are right now with the budget. I love Acting Chancellor Eric Yaga's metaphor as it relates to pies. I'm personally a sweet potato pie girl, but I will tell you that pies are only part of the meal. There's an encompassing part of this that has to be looked at. And for us, there are several things that, as it relates to this, that are problematic. We know that our employees deserve and need increases in salaries. And I want to make sure that that is said frequently, as many of you have said multiple times, but we can't divorce from that the consequences of these recommendations as it exists to the current budgets that we are being asked to contemplate. The difference for us is significant. And more importantly, I think it impacts our ability as it relates to what we often call employees who are not funded by state sources. That is the greatest challenge that we have for us right now. As such, Nevada State would be forced to utilize a significant portion of our caseload growth funding allocated for the 23-25 biennium in order to cover the total institutional impacts of these non-funded increases. This means that the caseload growth, which is intended to cover added costs associated with increased enrollment, would need to be used in order to maintain staffing levels. Because the caseload growth component of the funding formula is based on a look-back model for growth that has already been attained, Nevada State has been teaching more students and incurring higher enrollment for the past 3 years without any additional state support. And as a result of the COLA legislation proposed, the college no longer has funding it has waited for in order to finally invest in additional faculty, staff, and services that are needed to fund our students. We were recently in an article by Forbes magazine that indicated that 50% of Nevada State students are Pell Grant recipients. So our most vulnerable student populations in our state are unable to have the necessary supports that would be provided by the necessary budgets that we're asking for. The total impacts for us would be about $2.1 million in FY24 and $3.1 million in FY25. And therefore, we would have to forego initiatives that included adding 11 new academic faculty, 15 new administrative faculty, 5 additional student affairs faculty, and 2 new classified staff members. The other thing that I would add to this, the college would not also be able to fund critically needed increases in our concurrent enrollment instructors, let alone the substantive conversations that need to be had about the continued growth of the organization. So for me, this is a moment that I think we have to think deeply about mission, and those are the conversations that I hope to elevate with you and with others as we have to make difficult decisions about the future of the system here in the state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any regents that have questions for President Pollard? Okay. President Helens?
Good morning. I'm Joyce Helens, president of Great Basin College. I'm speaking to you from our Elko campus, where the mood is actually very exciting because it's graduation week. You know, I focused on the same comment by the Nevada State professor that Regent Del Carlo did, the gaining and losing at the same time. I feel like that's Great Basin College's motto. I'm preparing metrics presentation for you all in June, and I like to take a broader look and a retrospective look. So I like to look at trend lines. And when I look from the recession to the present, the trend line for enrollment at Great Basin College is increased. The trend line for funding is decreased. And so that decline actually from the last Great Recession, we lost about 1/3 of our workforce. So for a small college, between 60 and 80 full-time positions, we've only gained back 12. So we're already in a precarious, although stable position. And it's like Regent Berger had said, there are no notches left on the belt. We've had creative mitigation for a very long time, where we've already looked at massive efficiencies, which is always a good thing, and particularly our work over the last 4 years with the University of Nevada, Reno. We've had cuts, we've increased grants, we've held positions vacant. That's just sort of normal what we're doing. And I also took a look, excuse me, of trend lines for employees. So when we had these cuts over the years, staff and administration had been cut. And it was interesting because we held the line for faculty. I mean, faculty are the ones that teach, that's our business. But holding the line for faculty when you have increased enrollment is actually a loss. I also took a look at the trend line for fee increases, and at Great Basin College, it's been minimal, and we're proud of that. But at this point, with no notches on the belt and looking at what could be the loss now, we are now looking at touching that line of the faculty where it could be up to 10 to 12 positions. And when I look at it as a businesswoman and running a business, it's a very bad decision, but there is no place to go now, including raising student fees. So I won't read to you what you already see in terms of, the 1.4 million or the 300,000, but for a small college, 300,000, 500,000, when you're already at the edge, can mean the difference between continuing on healthily and not. What particularly is concerning is that everyone believes the cost of living must be increased. Absolutely. And the thought that we are in this painful position because of an error, as Regent Goodman said, it's just exasperating. So we're at a place where it will be very painful. Again, we will have to touch faculty line, which I think is actually a very bad decision for our future. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any regents with questions? Okay. President Dalpy?
Hi, good morning. Kyle Dalpy, President, Western Nevada College. A lot been said. Trying to follow the pie analogy with the COLA at 80%, 65%, I might offer up a Diet Cola scenario. That's my dad joke for the day. But there have been a lot said. The COLA is overdue, and we do appreciate it, and we do need it for retention, and I believe the state is now seeing that now when we look at rates. If anyone's tried to register their car, it's 46% vacancy rate in DMV, and once it hits all agencies, it becomes a reality, and I appreciate the governor putting this forward and all of those of you managing it. I too must look at the whole situation, the whole thing. WNC has not had enrollment challenges as severe as other institutions over the last biennium, so our look back was really good. I feel very fortunate about that. That was strategic, but the rules changed a little bit, and when the funding formula was not used for this allocation, we lost $250,000 in one vote. I have to look at that now in addition to this other cost of the COLA. And I want to keep balancing this and moving forward. And you have the document in front of you. But when it comes to all of that, we back to the pies. We lost our whipped cream. But this affects everything. Now, having said that, the numbers are in the document there. We have been used to the 20 years and plus I've been here managing an 80% COLA. I would appreciate it if the mistake was fixed, the 80% of 80%. We have been able to manage that. Going deeper has hurt us. The options that are listed for Western Nevada College, we will not consider any more operating cuts. We can't because we are so tight already on our operating. We need money to be able to do things, to bring students in, to provide access and success. We can't look at eliminating positions anymore. That sneaks up behind you on COLA discussions because if you don't have the position, you don't get money for COLA for those positions. And we are already reduced to the point as a small school where we are functioning on a very thin bench, which brings us to the budget, on the budget document, item B, holding positions vacant, which is how we would naturally budget for the 20% difference. We would hold positions vacant for a period of time until we rehire them. And so depending on the position, that could be $5,000, that could be $10,000, it could be 2 months, 3 months. At a small institution, when I lose one person out of a department, I tend to lose the whole department. In 2020, our Veterans Resources person left, and we held that position vacant. That shut down that program. We have rehired that in September. That is run by one person. Many of our programs, including our academic programs, are run by one individual. If that person opts to leave the institution, I'm forced to hold that vacant to make up differences in the COLA and other budget reductions. And that may not be in the best interest of students, faculty, or staff. So we are looking at any given point, having to hold 4 to 5 positions vacant, which could happen by attrition, because we do have people who retire, and it takes us, as we've talked about, months to hire somebody new. And then if you get a failed search, you're saving even more, even though you're not getting the work done. To go deeper from the 80% means additional positions for vacancy savings, 2 to 3 more. And we have to look at both administration, classified, and faculty to balance that. We can't exist without faculty in the classroom. We shouldn't exist without faculty in the classroom. We are here for education, but at some point, the additional vacancies will be those found in the classroom. And our part-time workforce, which we applaud, is becoming very, very limited as we continue to try to increase those rates as well. So with that, the numbers are in there, the impact, and I'll answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from Regents? President Hilgerson? For some reason, President Hilgerson, we can't hear you.
Oh, hi, good morning. I'll start over. Good morning, Chair Brooks and Regents. I wish this was a happier time. I rushed here from Spokane, Washington area to be with you today. And again, I wish I didn't have to add just more dismal news. We have much of the same budget pressures that you just heard about. I really appreciated Dr. Zaragoza's detail because we are facing very, very similar issues at TMCC. I also think it is important to note that salaries are absolutely, we need to increase them. It's absolutely vital. We cannot continue on the road that we are. We are losing faculty. We're having trouble recruiting good faculty from other states because they look at the cost of housing, they look at the salaries, and they literally cannot come here. And that is a big problem. But also technology is becoming more expensive. In order to continue along the path of academic excellence, our faculty and staff at TMCC realize that there's a lot of great tech out there that can really have an impact on learning and retention and success for our students. So I guess my point here is that there's a tension, a growing tension between academic excellence, high quality public higher education, and the budget COLA issue that is before us today. As someone else pointed out, 80% of the operating budget is in salaries. At TMCC, that number is a little higher than that. So to come up with 4% just for the COLA while other cuts are still in progress, possibly, that is just a really bad situation. So we recently tried to reduce course fees. Many faculty did. We are concerned about raising tuition for students. We made some good moves at the faculty level to help students out. But on the other hand, we can't keep doing so if it means that Nevada's quality and excellence is eroded over time. And I think that's where we're at. Of course, you've heard the report. TMCC is no longer able to do more with less. If COLAs are not funded at the 80% level, if enrollment restoration does not occur, and if workforce investment monies are not allocated through GOED as we suspect they will be, which is a good piece of news, student fees are really the only lever that we can see, as sad and awful as that is, or program reductions, as you heard from WNC, will also be occurring at TMCC. But more importantly, there is an across-the-board erosion of excellence, and that's something that I think we need to talk more about. In many areas of study, TMCC has only 1 or 2 full-time faculty members on staff, and that problem will be exacerbated if we need to continue to leave instructional positions vacant. Examples of critically challenged programs include nursing, advanced manufacturing, diesel technology, welding, logistics, HVAC, machining, automotive, and data science. We give students the opportunity to pursue stackable credentials in many of these career and technical education fields, but staffing levels will not continue to meet this very creative way to help students get a job quickly, which in effect meets industry demands. EDAWN, our wonderful economic developers in Northern Nevada, has named distribution, logistics, e-commerce, technology, and advanced manufacturing as some of their key industries. Many companies continue to move into Northern Nevada, expanding and growing annually, and it's imperative that TMCC, as a community college serving Reno and Sparks, that we're ready not just to provide the training, but to provide high quality training that meets industry needs in a just-in-time fashion, and that is expensive. We need the state of Nevada to invest in our students and their families, to continue to invest in the training needs so that we have a strong workforce, and that's why we absolutely need to advocate and help our legislators understand that the COLA funding needs to be reinstated at minimum at the 80% level. Thank you so much, and now I'm open for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay. We'll move on to President Acharya.
Thank you, Chair Brooks and Regents and colleagues. Kumud Acharya, President of DRI. Many of DRI's administrative faculty are state-supported, obviously. The change in COLA will impact them. DRI's resource faculty are self-supporting, with their salaries paid for by the grants and contracts that they earn. So COLA obviously is welcome, and it's much needed, as everybody is saying here. But for research faculty, it is quite challenging right now. The research grant proposals that our faculty will work on next fiscal year were submitted based on the current salaries. A 10% COLA means a 10% increase in project costs, with no way to increase the funds to pay for that difference right now. So they'll have to do more with less money immediately for next year. DRI has obviously two pots of funding to support our operation. One is state funding, the other is ICR, overhead. So any shortfall in our state funding will have to cover by ICR. Typically, we use that ICR to support our faculty, support their proposal development, sabbaticals, all kinds of things. So that means that they will be getting less money because of that change in COLA. So right now, the fiscal impact on DRI self-supporting funds, we're looking at about $4.5 million over the biennium. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? President Sandoval?
Chair Brooks. So,
Regent Bullen, do you have a question?
yes, sir. Thank you. Quick question for Dr. Acharya. Maybe I missed it, but what does ICR stand for?
Thank you, Regent Boylan. ICR is indirect cost recovery. So every dollar that we bring to DRI for research, we add additional 65 cents to that dollar, and that 65 cents goes to our operations and faculty. So that's what ICR is. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
President Sandoval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Regents, Chancellor Kiaga, for the record, Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno, and thank you for this opportunity to present today. I suppose I'll start similar to where the Chancellor started in terms of putting this in perspective. I'm elated about the COLAs. Our faculty and staff deserve these COLAs. They've worked very hard throughout the pandemic. They've had to do more with less. The cost of living has increased. So as I said, I am really pleased that the governor and the legislature have included in their budgets these COLAs that we've been discussing. Obviously, and what has been the point here today is the unintended consequence of the COLAs. I'm really, as I said, pleased that the state's in a position that it'll be able to offer these, but these COLAs, at least the proposal is the most in the history of this state. And, at least I've been around almost as long as the Chancellor, and I mean that respectfully. But anyway, I don't know if there's an understanding that what that impact will be on in terms of the unintended consequence. You have in your packets at pages 12 and 13 the fiscal impact of the COLA funding on the University of Nevada, Reno. So I'm not going to repeat myself, but it's very similar to what these other presidents have talked about in terms of how do we do this? And it really is difficult. And I think I've heard many of the regents articulate that it really creates this Hobson's choice. So there isn't this magic pot of money anywhere to go in order to balance the budget. If you go to the reserves, that may help for 1 year or maybe even 2, but obviously this is a permanent part of the budget, so that won't be sustainable. So you have to look at keeping positions open. You have to look at eliminating positions, or as we've all talked about, this horrible possibility of having to increase fees. There really is no other place to go. So again, we at UNR are also facing a reduction in our weighted student credit hours. So we already have some budget impacts that aren't even included on this sheet. We're estimating $3.2 million per year for the next 2 fiscal years. So when you add that on top of the COLAs, it really creates a difficult situation. I mean, I think it all begs the question, and I think that's part of the wisdom of holding this meeting, Mr. Chair, is to really get out into the public while the legislature is still in session, while there's still time to have meaningful discussion in Carson City about the real impacts of this, and try to get by this perspective or this fiction that higher ed has some other levers that it can go to in order to fund these things. So I don't envy all of you if this moves forward, envy any of us, because there are no good decisions here. There are no, we either have to affect the quality of instruction and the quality of the student experience on our campuses because of the reductions and find that money there, or, as I said, consider increases in student fees in order to balance these things, or a combination thereof. On our campus, we have been maintaining constant communication with our faculty staff. We conducted a town hall so that we could give them real-time information as to what was going on with the legislature. I just had the opportunity to meet with our faculty senate and again explain to them. Similar to what President Acharya talked about, our research faculty is very concerned, and we have the same impacts that they have there at DRI. So, we will continue to be your partner. As I like to tell everyone on our campus, everything we know now, and help to get to a place where if this does continue on the path that we're on, that we can work together to find the best balance in order to provide the best quality education that we can for our students. So with that, Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Regents, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Actually, Mr. Chair, I don't think I said in the beginning, I really want, again, to emphasize thanking the governor and the legislatures. This truly is historical position, and there are a lot of people that are very enthusiastic on their campus. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sandoval. Are there any questions for President Sandoval? No? Okay. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record, Dale Urquiaga. I just want to make some sort of summative remarks as we sort of wrap up here. First, I want to thank the presidents and their business officers who have worked so closely with CFO Klinger to come before you with what is not always a great story. You've heard, these are difficult decisions. But you have heard me talk twice now about my childhood experience of painting fences. And one of the points of that story is that painting fences is easier together. And what I am happy about today, one, I am, as you have heard over many speakers, I'm very grateful and happy for the size of the overall budget and the capital improvement projects. That's good for the state of Nevada. I'm also really pleased to see the way the presidents have come together, the business officers have come together, and to hear your comments, even though you may not think it. When you ask a question, or you ask a clarifying question, or you make a statement, that helps me speak on your behalf. And so I appreciate the teaminess, since we've had mathiness and wordiness today. I appreciate the teaminess of this conversation. It does make this next 3 weeks easier. And I don't want to end on a negative note. This is a good problem to have, as I have said. And so I wanted to say, you're going to ask me, what can we do? You all have a phone, you all have email, use it. Let your legislators know, let your governor know your appreciation, let your constituents know. It goes for our students and our faculty. I can't be alone in the next 3 weeks at the legislature with my hand out for $26 million. This is a joint effort, and the presidents are visiting the building now. They've sent their provosts, as they have throughout the session, and their staff is there, the government affairs staff. So this is not over, and I think that we can continue to make gains as we have throughout this session, so that we can retain our faculty and support our students. So I guess I'll just close with two last things. One, I have been around longer than President Sandoval. I am 1 day older. Tomorrow, his hair will be as white as mine. I just want him to know that, since he pointed it out. And second, over my career and my time as a dad, people have said, well, I want this and I would like that. And my answer is typically, since we've President Dalby has raised the specter of diet colas and Bridget Brager has discussed tightening our belts, my answer was always, well, I would like a 28-inch waist and a new nose. But I don't get either of those things, clearly, without a lot of work. And so there's a lot of work left to go. And however the budget ends, there will be lots of work ahead of this system. And I, for one, believe that we are up to it. So thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to hear this conversation today. Please carry on the conversation. That goes to all of my 15,000 coworkers and our 100,000 students as well. Please carry on what you've heard today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We appreciate your time and the report. Regent Downs, you have a question or comment?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Brooks. Regent Downs. For the record, I have a statement I prepared. And I apologize if it gets a little far afield, but I'm trying to make an overall point here. I'm not sure where to begin in discussing this topic, but I want to take a more holistic view of the situation. First, I'm very appreciative to Governor Lombardo and the Nevada legislature for funding both NSHE, the budget, and the COLAs. And I'm assuming they might be listening today. So if I could make one more ask of the legislature, please restore the funding to as the governor proposed and give us the 80%. But regarding the shortfall of the COLA funding, regardless of how the money is supplied, we need to fund this COLA for the NSHE employees. I've heard several theories and rumors about distrust between the Nevada legislature and NSHE, and even Chancellor Kiaga mentioned it today. And it'd be nice if we could find a time to resolve those issues. Failure to fully fund the COLAs in this situation could grow some ill will between our body and theirs. I'd also like to ask for some clarity from those who have institutional knowledge and some long-term memory of what may have happened in the past. I can share some of my understandings. So I'm going to say something now that may not be accurate or complete, but I'm going to share what has been my impression of the situation, having been in NSHE since 2001. Do mathiness here. So it's at 22 years now. So I believe there was a time in the recent past that we requested to keep our student funds. And does that correspond with that 65% issue? That we used to send the money to the general fund and then it got back to us after the legislature had it. So if someone has that knowledge and can clarify for me, I would appreciate educating me on that situation. I also understand where the 64% would come from the 80% and 8%, so that makes sense. So aside from that, What frustrates me about the funding cycle is the methodology of how institutions are funded. So again, I apologize if I go too far afield here, but I have a statement. I feel like I need to make this while we're still in session. So there's a funding formula that was developed during a past session that changed how schools are funded, removing a rule factor, which I definitely felt that when I was teaching out in Fallon, where we were able to have classes of 8-to-1, and that went away because of the funding formula that went in place. Creating a structure by which four-year schools are able to, and I don't fault four-year schools for this, so please don't take this as a negative, get different types of funding or compensation for 300, 400, 500, all the way up different levels of classes. Two-year schools could tap into part of this, but we're limited to a factor of 4 for some workforce development courses like welding and automotive. So I'm going to make this a little personal because of schools like Western Nevada College and Nevada State College, how they adjusted their course offerings and the delivery methods to comply with the priorities set by the legislature in the funding formula. But now we have this, so having adapted to the funding formula and using a formula to build enrollment, the legislature at this time, and I'd like some clarification how this happened, effectively ignored that by reducing the governor's proposed budget to these two institutions by a combined amount of approximately $1.25 million over the biennium. And some four-year schools got a big increase beyond what the formula would have provided. So to be clear, I'd never advocate for any institution to receive less, but NSC and WNC certainly do not deserve to be penalized for adhering to the formula priorities established by the legislature. It's almost as if there's a set amount, and I can relate to this in other areas, but there's a set amount of money they want to go to the different schools, and if the formula doesn't provide for it, they find some other reason to do it. So if that's the situation, what I would like to see at some point, maybe before the next session happens, is if the NSHE leadership can meet with the legislative leadership and say, what is the priority? How do they want money to go to these schools? And maybe we can work in that direction. Just lay the cards on the table and let's try to do as they really want. My final point I want to make, and I'm just going to say it. How many people are representing NSHE or the institutions of NSHE at the legislature? Is it more than 1 or 2 people? We're a system, and each school here is interconnected with each other. Several schools here have MOUs. We have, I know NSC has 2+2 and 3+1 programs with several schools as well. That really serves our students very well. As Mr. Wixom stated at the orientation in January, where we are charged with serving the people of the state of Nevada, representing all the institutions. I've heard that individual institutions have put forth lobbying efforts independent of the system lobbying. How does that look for the legislature? Do they see that as one group coming forward or individual schools trying to get their pieces of that pie? So I would suggest that in the future we consider advocating for NSHE as a whole and not for institutions as individuals, and try to put forth that combined front and that combined effort. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Downs. Acting Chancellor, you have another closing comment?
Actually, yes, and I'd like to be responsive to Regent Downs because he asked a couple of questions, some of which I know the answers to. The question about the fees, Regent Downs, so in the funding formula revision that occurred in 2013 is when NSHE's ability to keep its fees occurred. It used to be, you're correct, fees were swept essentially to the state and then redistributed. So that occurred in the funding formula revision 10 years ago now. The COLA shift from 80% to 65% occurred only 4 years ago. So they are not linked. So I hope that's helpful. Second, thank you for reminding me of the funding formula. I am, as we know, a day older than President Sandoval, and I forgot to say there is a bill tomorrow morning to discuss the revision of the funding formula, there is also a bill that has been amended in the Senate from Senator Doñate that will address the funding formula. And I believe in the interim, that funding formula study will address institutional disparity. There is some in the current funding formula, as you have noted, as well as what I always refer to as sort of student type and cost of higher education, which was not included in the previous study. So I would echo your statements about working with the legislature during the interim. You'll have the vehicle of a funding formula study to do so, to have kind of these real-time conversations about what is the vision and the future for the state. And then lastly, I will offer CFO Klinger to discuss with you the funding formula change that was recommended by LCB staff. It's not great, and yet I just want you to have his perspective on that as well, as he's talked to President Dalpy a little bit about it. So thank you for bringing those things up. And Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to continue to talk on this day, but I don't want us to end without saying one more thing, and that is where I was before. This is, I think, a team. I think we can now act like a family. I echo the statement of Regent Downs that we should work together as a system more. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that our colleagues at Nevada State lost a peer, an employee member this weekend, someone who works in the president's office. And so I appreciate President Pollard being here today. And my heart goes out to her and to our colleagues at Nevada State. Their loss is our loss. And I think that ought to be a reminder to us that we are one system and that we are one family. And that situation should, I hope, motivate us to, as I said in my previous closing remarks, to just work harder. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Acting Chancellor, and thank you for bringing up what we certainly were thinking about over the last couple of days with Nevada State College. One of the things I think that can be made very clear in terms of where the board sits and in regards to our institutions and presidents is that we have an expectation of everyone working together to be able to support the COLA increases. And while we are very thankful that the governor has made an amendment and that we initially have some COLA funding to make these increases, which again lead to other discussions regarding faculty retention, we certainly hope and we're optimistic that the legislative bodies, through the voices of the institutions, the system office, and the regents, will see very clearly that we've got to support this $26 million gap. Otherwise, we'll have unintentional fallout that reduces the quality and effectiveness of some of the things we have to do at these institutions, and certainly will hit our students from a financial perspective that we would most definitely like to stay away from. As we move forward in these conversations and based on some of the things that happen, we may have to call on the presidents to let us know a little bit more in-depthly of moving away from asking for an increase in student fees and doing something differently that might have to do with services and layoffs. And again, those are conversations that we certainly don't want to have. So I employ the presidents and everyone to do what we can to help the legislators understand that we really do need this funding, and it will greatly affect higher education in the state of Nevada if we aren't able to close this gap. With that, I don't see any other questions or comments. Regent Goodman?
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to say that, I'm not aware of any kind of issues with the legislature. Every time I've gone up there, they've received me very kindly, and I think we need to have our hat in our hands. They've done such a wonderful job for the COLA raise. The governor has been amazing, and he's put through this amendment, and I think we're all here to do the same, and I'm very sure from all the people that I know up in the legislature that they don't want this to impact students the way that it surely will. And that's really who's going to suffer, is the students. And so I am going to reach out. I'm going to send emails and talk to individuals and just let them know that, excuse me, the individuals who will suffer from this disparity from 65 to 80% are the students. And I'm not willing to do that, and I surely don't want to take the heat for it hopefully that time does not come. So I just wanted to reiterate that and just ask my other board members to do the same. They've done a great job for us, and this is that last piece. And I would ask that we all go with our hat in our hand and show them that we are a board that wants to work together, that can get great, meaningful things done. Thank you.
We'll move now into agenda item number 3, new business. Are there any suggested items for new business? Seeing none, we'll move into public comment. Is there any public comment in Elko?
There was no public comment in Elko.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in Reno?
Yes, there is. Good morning again. Jim New, NEW, and I just wanted to say, boy, has this meeting been a buzzkill. I came in here very happy that we had some optimistic words to share with you today, but I think the reality sets in, especially when we heard the F word from the Regent furloughs. I can guarantee the NFA, the Nevada Faculty Alliance, will be opposed to any furloughs. I also understand the board's reticence over student fee increases, but with the predictive pricing model in place, those student increases are going to be coming based on the inflation that we're experiencing today. They're just going to hit us 5 years from now, as is our policy. So I would like you all to take that into consideration as you're looking at the options that we have before us, because I realize you have no good options. And I appreciate the work that you're doing on this, and I'm very happy that I'm no longer in the position to have to deal with this myself. However, I do appreciate the work that you all have to do. So thank you.
Is there any additional public comment in Reno?
No, there's not.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.